The day I landed in America, I had exactly $327 in my pocket. That was all the money I had in the world. I remember sitting at the airport, staring at my phone, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. Everyone thinks coming to America is easy. They think the moment you land, life magically changes. But nobody talks about the fear. Nobody talks about the loneliness. Nobody talks about the nights when you feel like giving up. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of how I went from a broke immigrant to building a life I once thought was impossible. I grew up in a small town where opportunities were almost non-existent. My parents worked hard their entire lives, but we were always one emergency away from losing everything. I remember my father telling me something when I was 17. He said, "Son, if you ever get the chance to leave and build a better life, take it." For years, that sentence stayed in my mind. So when the opportunity came to move to America, I took it. But what I didn't know was the hardest part of my life was about to begin. The first night in America didn't feel like a dream. It felt like survival. After leaving the airport, I dragged my small suitcase through streets I had only seen in movies. Everything looked big, fast, unfamiliar. But inside, I felt incredibly small. I didn't have family here, no close friends, no real plan, just hope. And honestly, hope doesn't pay rent. I found the cheapest room I could online. It wasn't really an apartment. It was a tiny basement room in a stranger's house. No windows, old carpet, a small bed that creaked every time I moved. But that night I sat on that bed and told myself something. You didn't come here to quit. The next morning I woke up early. Jet lag, nervous energy, fear, all mixed together. I printed out 10 copies of my resume and started walking into stores, coffee shops, gas stations. Small restaurants. Everywhere I went, I heard the same thing. "Sorry, we're not hiring." Or worse, they looked at my resume, heard my accent, and said politely, "We'll call you." But nobody ever called. By the end of that day, my feet hurt. My confidence hurt even more. And for the first time since arriving, I started wondering if my father's advice had ruined my life. The second week in America was harder than the first. My savings were disappearing faster than I expected. Rent, food, transportation, everything cost more than I imagined. Every morning I left that tiny basement room with the same mission: find a job. Any job. I didn't care what it was anymore. I walked into grocery stores, warehouses, fast food restaurants, small construction offices. Sometimes the manager wouldn't even look at my resume. Sometimes they just shook their head before I finished talking. Rejection after rejection. It slowly started eating away at my confidence. Back home, people believed in me. My parents told everyone I was going to America to build a better life. But here, I felt invisible. One night, I called my mother. She sounded happy to hear my voice. She asked the question I was afraid of. "So, how is America?" I paused. For a moment, I almost told her the truth, that I was scared, that I hadn't found work, that I felt completely lost. But instead, I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. And I said, "It's good, Mom. Everything is going great." Then, after the call ended, I sat alone in that small room. And for the first time since arriving in America, I cried. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes. I barely slept that night. My mind kept repeating the same question. Did I make the biggest mistake of my life? But staying in bed wasn't an option. If I stopped trying, everything would collapse. So I grabbed my worn-out shoes, my cheap jacket, and stepped outside again. The cold morning air in America felt different, quiet, heavy, like the city didn't care whether I succeeded or failed. I walked for hours again, store after store, office after office. The answers were always the same. "We're not hiring. Come back next month. Leave your resume." At one small restaurant, the manager looked at me and said, "You don't have U.S. experience." That sentence hit harder than anything. How do you get experience if nobody gives you a chance? By late afternoon, my legs were tired. My stomach was empty. I had only a few dollars left in my pocket. I sat on a bus stop bench. Cars rushed past. People walked by. Nobody noticed me. That's when a dark thought crossed my mind. What if this dream was never meant for me? For a moment, I actually thought about giving up, about going back home. But deep inside me, a small voice whispered something. Just try one more day. That night, I slept inside a crowded shelter. Dozens of strangers in one room, some snoring, some coughing, some whispering about their own broken lives. I stared at the ceiling. I couldn't stop thinking. Back home, people believed I was living the American dream. But the truth? I was homeless, alone, and barely surviving. Tears rolled slowly down my face. I quickly wiped them away, not because anyone was watching, but because I promised myself something years ago. No matter how hard life gets, I will not break. The next morning I woke up early, before everyone else. The sky outside was still dark, but something inside me had changed. Yesterday I almost gave up. Today I refused to quit. I walked out of that shelter with a new decision. I would knock on every single door if I had to, and if nobody gave me a chance, I would create one myself. That morning I walked through the cold streets of the city again. Same empty wallet, same tired body, but a completely different mindset. I stopped in front of a small cafe. The sign on the window said, "Help Wanted." My heart started beating faster. I walked inside. The smell of coffee filled the air. People were laughing, talking, living normal lives. For a moment, I felt like I didn't belong there, but I forced myself to walk to the counter. A middle-aged man was standing there. I quietly said, "Sir, are you still hiring?" He looked at me, then looked at my worn-out jacket and tired eyes. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything. Those seconds felt like hours. Finally, he asked, "Do you have any experience?" I swallowed my pride and said the truth. "No, sir, but I'm willing to work harder than anyone here." He stared at me again. Then he sighed. "Come tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. My heart almost exploded. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't a big job. It wasn't a high salary. But for me, it was hope. Next morning, 5:30 a.m. The city was still half asleep, but I was already standing in front of the cafe door. Nervous, excited, scared, all at the same time. At exactly 6 a.m., the owner opened the door. He looked surprised. "You're early." I smiled slightly. I didn't want to lose this chance. He nodded and handed me an apron. "All right, let's see how hard you can work." That day was brutal. Washing dishes, cleaning tables, taking trash out, running orders, for 10 hours straight. My hands hurt. My back was burning. But inside my heart, something felt different. For the first time in months, I felt useful. At the end of the day, the owner called me. He handed me a small envelope. "Your first day's pay." My hands were shaking when I opened it. It wasn't a lot, but to me, it felt like $1 million, because for the first time in my life, I earned something with dignity. That night, I didn't go to any restaurant. I didn't buy anything expensive. Instead, I went to a small grocery store and bought 3 simple things: bread, eggs, and a small bottle of water. Then I sat on the same old bench, the same bench where I had slept for weeks. But tonight felt different, because this time I wasn't just surviving, I was starting again. While eating my simple meal,
I kept looking at the envelope, my first honest income. Tears slowly rolled down my face, not because I was sad, but because for the first time I felt hope. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. The message said, "Hey, I heard you got a job today." My heart skipped. It was my old friend, Rafik, the same friend who disappeared when I lost everything. I stared at the screen, thinking, why is he texting me now? I slowly typed back, "How did you know?" A few seconds later, another message arrived, and what he wrote next completely shocked me. I quickly opened Rafik's message. My hands were shaking. The message said, "I saw you today, at the bus station." I froze. Saw me? Where? I immediately replied, "Where were you?" 3 dots appeared on the screen. Then another message came. I was inside the office building across the road. My heart started beating faster. Office building? Why was Rafik there? Before I could think more, he sent another message.
"Come tomorrow morning. I want to show you something." I stared at the phone for a long time. Rafik was the same friend who vanished when I lost everything, when I was homeless. He never called, never asked if I was alive. And now suddenly he wanted to meet? Something didn't feel right, but curiosity was stronger. So I replied, "Okay, where?" His answer came instantly. "City Bus Company office, 9 a.m. My eyes widened. City Bus Company? That's one of the biggest transport companies in the city. Why would he call me there? That night, I barely slept. My mind was full of questions. The next morning, I stood in front of a huge glass building. Above the door was a giant sign, City Bus Company. I took a deep breath and walked inside. But the moment I entered, everyone inside the office suddenly looked at me, like they were waiting. And then someone said, "Sir, we've been expecting you." I stood there confused. Expecting me? What was happening? And then I saw Rafik walking toward me with a strange smile. Rafik extended his hand, and I shook it hesitantly. "Daniel," he said, "I've been watching your journey. I know what you've been through." My stomach twisted. How do you know?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "People talk. Stories like yours don't stay hidden for long. But I'm not here to talk about the past. I want to offer you something. A chance." I blinked. "A chance?" "Yes," he said, motioning toward the office. "We're launching a new initiative at City Bus Company. We need someone who understands struggle, resilience, and determination. Someone who can manage a small team, organize routes, and help us improve operations." I shook my head. I'm just a delivery driver. I don't have experience in transport management."
Rafik leaned closer. "Exactly. You have experience surviving when the odds were stacked against you. That's what matters. That mindset, that drive, that's rare. If you take this role, I guarantee it'll change your life." My heart pounded. The same city that once ignored me, that saw me sleeping in my car, now offered me a doorway, a real opportunity. I looked at Rafik, then at the bustling office, the maps on the walls, the schedules taped up neatly, and I realized this was bigger than any job I had dreamed of. I nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it." And at that moment, I knew something had shifted, from survival mode to building a legacy. The bus company wasn't just a workplace. It was my next step to prove that even the lowest valleys can lead to the highest peaks. My first day at City Bus Company felt like stepping into another world. The buses lined up in the depot gleamed under the morning sun. Their polished exteriors reflected the hope I hadn't felt in months. Rafik introduced me to the team: mechanics, drivers, dispatchers, people who had been doing this for years. I felt out of place. "Don't worry," Rafik whispered as we walked through the garage. "You'll catch up. Just pay attention and ask questions." I nodded, gripping my clipboard like a lifeline. The morning was chaos. Engines roared, radios crackled, drivers hustled to their routes. I shadowed a senior manager named Carla. She was sharp, no nonsense, and intimidating. Every instruction she gave was precise. Every question she asked tested your attention to detail.
By midday, my legs ached, my head spun, but I kept going. Each bus I checked, each schedule I adjusted, I reminded myself, I've survived worse. I've slept in my car, lived on scraps, faced rejection every single day. I can handle this. During the lunch break, Carla pulled me aside. "You have potential," she said, looking me in the eyes, "but potential means nothing if you don't push yourself. Learn fast, be decisive, and don't be afraid to fail. Mistakes will happen. What matters is how you recover." I swallowed hard. She didn't know how much I already understood about failure. By the end of the day, I had run routes, coordinated dispatches, and even solved a minor scheduling conflict. Small victories, but each felt monumental. Driving home that evening, I looked at the buses lined up under the streetlights, and I realized this was more than a job. This was my chance to build something tangible, something lasting. For the first time in years, I felt unstoppable. The very next week, my first real test came, faster than I expected. It was a rainy Thursday morning. The city streets glistened under the heavy drizzle, and the buses were running late. I was monitoring the dispatch when a call came in. Route 17, bus broke down near Elm Street, passengers stuck. My stomach dropped. This was it, the moment I'd been anxious about. I grabbed my headset and coordinated with the nearest mechanics, trying to reroute another bus to pick up stranded passengers. Carla watched me quietly from her office. Minutes felt like hours. Phones kept ringing, drivers were frustrated, passengers were complaining. I made decisions quickly, communicated clearly, and adjusted schedules on the fly. By the end of the morning, every passenger was picked up safely, and the buses were back on track. Carla came over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You handled that well," she said. "Not everyone keeps their head when things go sideways. You did." I exhaled, a mixture of relief and pride washing over me. That night, as I drove home in the quiet rain, I thought about all the times I'd felt powerless, sleeping in my car, facing eviction, waiting for a call that never came. And now, here I was, making real decisions, helping people, taking control. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't flashy, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I could build something bigger than survival. A few days later, I got my first official recognition at work. It wasn't a promotion, not yet, just a simple email from the regional manager. "Your quick thinking during the Route 17 incident did not go unnoticed. Keep up the good work." I stared at the screen for a long moment. No one had ever told me that before. Not at school, not at any previous job, not even my own family. It felt validating. That night, I drove home under the city lights, thinking about how far I'd come, from sleeping in a car to being homeless to receiving praise for handling a chaotic bus route. My life felt like it was shifting. I realized something powerful. Survival was one thing, but growth, real growth, came from stepping up when it mattered most. The following week, I volunteered for extra shifts, shadowed senior supervisors, and absorbed every bit of knowledge I could. I asked questions, took notes, observed patterns, learned how routes were optimized, how schedules were planned, how emergencies were handled. Every small insight felt like adding bricks to a foundation. By the end of the month, Carla called me into her office. "I see potential in you," she said. "If you keep this up, there could be a leadership role for you soon." I nodded, my chest tight with both pride and determination. For the first time in years, I truly believed that the story of my life was changing. The first week on the job was brutal. Early mornings, long hours, heavy packages. I drove from dawn until dusk, barely stopping except for gas and a quick snack. My body ached, my back throbbed, my hands blistered. Every muscle protested,
Every joint felt like it might give out. But every night, when I parked the delivery van and counted my tips, I felt a small victory. I was earning, I was surviving, and more importantly, I was moving forward. One evening, I sat in my car after work, exhausted but determined. I opened my notebook and wrote down a plan. Save every dollar, avoid unnecessary expenses, keep applying for better opportunities. It was rough, it was uncomfortable, but I finally felt the tiniest glimmer of control over my life again. That night, staring at the city lights through the windshield, I whispered to myself, I can do this. I will do this.
By the second month, I began to see small progress. I found a cheap storage unit for my belongings. It wasn't much, but it meant my life didn't have to fit entirely in my car anymore. I cooked simple meals at a friend's apartment when they offered, trying to save every cent. Every small choice felt monumental. Every decision mattered. One night, I sat alone on a park bench, staring at the city lights. I realized something important. I had survived rock bottom. I had faced homelessness. I had faced rejection, hunger, and shame. And I was still standing. It was exhausting, yes, but it was proof. Proof that I could climb back up. Proof that even the darkest night eventually ends with a sunrise. Around this time, I also started volunteering at a local community kitchen. At first, it was just to have a warm meal and a place to shower, but soon it became something more. Helping others reminded me that life wasn't just about surviving, it was about connection. The people there were struggling too. Some had lost jobs, some had lost homes, some were battling addiction or illness, but everyone had a story. Every smile, every thank you, every conversation reminded me that I wasn't alone. It gave me perspective, and it ignited a new fire inside me. If I could lift someone else, even a little, maybe I could lift myself too. It was a small step, but it mattered more than I could explain. Months passed, and slowly I began building a routine. Wake up, deliver packages, return to the library or community center, apply for better jobs, stretch every dollar. Every day felt like climbing a steep hill, but at least I was moving. One day, while filling out an application for a part-time warehouse supervisor position, I hesitated. I doubted myself. Do I even have what it takes anymore? I whispered under my breath. But then I remembered the nights in my car, the eviction notice, the fear of having nowhere to go. I thought about every small victory since then, and I typed out the application, hit submit, and felt a weight lift off my chest. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful, not just surviving, but aiming higher. A week later, I got the call for an interview. My hands shook as I answered. "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" the voice asked. "Yes," I said, barely able to contain my excitement. I spent the night preparing, rehearsing answers, practicing handshakes in the bathroom mirror, picking out clothes that weren't wrinkled. I wanted to show them I wasn't just someone scraping by. I was someone ready to work, to lead, to prove myself. The next morning, I arrived early. The office smelled of fresh coffee and paper. The manager shook my hand firmly. "Let's talk about your experience," she said. I told my story honestly, focusing on my resilience and willingness to work hard. By the end of the interview, I knew I had left everything on the table. No regrets, only hope. A few days later, I got the email. "We'd like to offer you the position." I read it 3 times to make sure it was real. Then I sat down in my car and let out a laugh I hadn't realized I was holding in. It was a mixture of relief, disbelief, and joy. I immediately called my best friend to share the news. We both laughed and cried on the phone. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a foothold again. I started the new job the following week. The pay was better, the hours were more manageable, and the responsibilities challenged me in ways that felt meaningful.
Every shift reminded me why I kept pushing. Every paycheck reminded me that my life could be rebuilt brick by brick. Over the next few months, I settled into a routine. I paid off small debts, saved a little every week, even treated myself to a proper meal at a diner now and then. It felt surreal. I went from sleeping in a car to having a modest apartment again. But the experience had changed me. I was more cautious with money, more aware of how fragile stability can be. I also became more compassionate. I volunteered at the shelter whenever I could. I donated small amounts to food banks, and I shared my story with anyone who would listen. Because surviving rock bottom isn't just about yourself. It's about learning, growing, and lifting others as you climb. Then came the moment that truly tested me. A close friend, someone I trusted completely, betrayed me. They took advantage of my trust and a loan I had given them. It was more than money. It was the principle. I felt anger, hurt, and disbelief all at once. For a moment, I thought of giving up, of retreating into the safety of my apartment and ignoring the world. But then I remembered the nights in my car, the hunger, the fear, the loneliness. I realized if I had survived that, I could survive this too. I chose not to lash out. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my boundaries, on protecting my hard-earned stability. And slowly, I began to heal from the sting of betrayal. I learned that resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about protecting your peace too. Around this time, I also decided to take a small step toward my dream. I had always wanted to start a small business, even when life felt impossible. Now I had a stable job and some savings. I began brainstorming ideas late at night, scribbling notes in my notebook. Coffee cups piled up around me. I researched markets, customers, and products. I reached out to mentors and read every article I could find. Every idea was tested in my mind. Every plan was written down, revised, and rewritten again. It wasn't easy. It wasn't glamorous, but each small action felt like reclaiming a part of my life I thought I had lost forever. I realized that surviving was one thing, but building something lasting, that was a new challenge entirely. The first prototype of my business idea was simple. I didn't have funds for a fancy setup, just a laptop, a basic website, and determination. I launched it quietly, without telling many people. The first few days were slow, almost painfully slow. Orders trickled in, maybe 1 or 2 a day. I celebrated every single one like it was a victory, because it was. Each sale meant someone believed in me, even a little. Each positive message from a customer reminded me that I had value, that my ideas could make an impact. I kept improving the website, learning marketing strategies online, and experimenting with small ads. Step by step, I was slowly building a foundation, a future that didn't just survive, but could thrive. By the 6-month mark, my little business was starting to grow. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I had traction. People were noticing my products. Returning customers left positive reviews. I reinvested every dollar I could spare, bought better packaging, improved shipping times.
And slowly, I felt a sense of pride that I hadn't felt in years. The journey from sleeping in my car to building something that mattered was surreal. I remembered those nights of despair, the hunger, the fear, the shame. And I realized each step forward wasn't just about success. It was about reclaiming my identity, my dignity, and proving, first to myself, that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. Around this time, I also started sharing my story publicly, not for attention, not for pity, but to inspire. I wrote blog posts, shared videos, and spoke at small local events. I wanted people to know that rock bottom isn't the end, that even in the darkest moments, you can start climbing again. I received messages from strangers telling me my story gave them hope, people who had lost jobs, people struggling with debt, people facing eviction. They thanked me for showing them that it was possible to rise again. And every message reminded me why I had started sharing my journey. Because survival is powerful, but helping others survive, thrive, and rebuild, that's transformative. As my business continued to grow, I faced new challenges. Scaling up meant dealing with more customers, bigger orders, and unexpected problems. Mistakes happened. Shipments got delayed. Some products were damaged in transit. I felt the familiar sting of failure creeping back. But this time, I handled it differently. I apologized to customers promptly. I learned from each mistake. I adapted my processes. Every challenge became a lesson. Every setback became fuel. I realized that resilience wasn't just about surviving homelessness or betrayal. It was about navigating success, staying humble, and continuing to grow even when things got hard. One evening, after closing my laptop and counting the day's sales, I sat back and reflected. I'd come so far from those nights sleeping in my car, from the shame and fear of being homeless, from the uncertainty of whether I'd ever eat a proper meal again. I thought about all the people who had helped me along the way, the shelter staff, the librarians, the friends who offered a hand when I had nothing. And I realized something important. Success isn't just about money or recognition. It's about growth, perseverance, and the people you touch along the way. I felt grateful, and for the first time, truly proud, not just of surviving, but of becoming someone I could respect. By the end of the first year, my business was steady. I could pay my bills on time, I had a small savings account, and I even began thinking about future investments. But more importantly, I had regained confidence. Confidence I had lost during the months of uncertainty and fear. I could walk into any room without hiding my story. I could talk about my struggles openly, and people listened. I realized my journey had given me a voice I could use to motivate, inspire, and guide others. And every time I shared a part of my story, I reminded myself of the path I had walked, the hardships, the betrayals, the small victories that added up. Around this time, I also started mentoring others who were struggling, formerly homeless individuals, recent immigrants, and young people trying to find their way. I shared what I had learned about budgeting, job hunting, and resilience. I taught them how to set small goals and celebrate every tiny achievement. It was rewarding beyond words. Watching someone take their first steps toward stability reminded me of my own journey. Every success story, no matter how small, felt like a victory. And I realized that giving back wasn't just charity, it was an essential part of my healing and growth.
It made me feel connected. It made my struggles feel purposeful. It gave my life meaning beyond mere survival. By now, I had learned to embrace the uncertainty of life. I still faced challenges, unexpected expenses, slow sales, and occasional self-doubt. But I no longer feared them. Each obstacle reminded me of the strength I had discovered within myself. I knew I could endure hardship. I knew I could adapt. And most importantly, I knew I could rise again, no matter how hard I fell. Looking back, I realized that my journey from homelessness to stability wasn't just about money or jobs. It was about discovering resilience, courage, and self-worth. And as I prepared for the next chapter, I felt ready to grow, ready to thrive, and ready to turn my story into a legacy. Around this time, an opportunity came that I never expected. A small local magazine reached out after reading my story online. They wanted to feature me in an article about overcoming adversity. I was nervous. Public attention was new territory, but I agreed. The interview lasted for hours. I spoke openly about my homelessness, my struggles, and the slow climb back to stability. I shared the lessons I had learned, the mistakes I had made, and the small victories that kept me going. When the article was published, the response was overwhelming. Emails, messages, and calls poured in from people who related to my story. For the first time, I realized my experience could inspire a broader audience, beyond just my immediate circle. The publicity opened doors I hadn't imagined. Small business owners reached out for advice. Local organizations invited me to speak at events. I began to see that my journey, painful as it was, had given me credibility and perspective. I could offer guidance because I had truly experienced struggle, and the gratitude I received from others fueled me further. Every conversation, every handshake, every story shared reminded me that my past was not a burden. It was an asset. I learned to use my voice strategically, to inspire, to mentor, to connect with people who were looking for hope in their own lives. And with each opportunity, my confidence grew. Around this period, I also began exploring new skills. I took online courses in marketing, finance, and leadership. Late nights were spent watching tutorials, reading books, and practicing what I learned. I knew that knowledge would multiply the value of the work I was already doing. Every new skill felt like another tool in my survival kit, only now it was for thriving.
I experimented with social media campaigns, better product photography, and customer engagement strategies. Slowly, my business began to scale more efficiently. Orders increased, customer satisfaction grew, and I realized that investing in myself was just as important as investing in my business. The lessons from the streets, combined with new knowledge, were creating something powerful. With my business growing, I started thinking about long-term goals. I didn't just want stability anymore, I wanted impact. I wanted to create opportunities for others who were struggling like I once did. I began networking with local nonprofits and community leaders. I pitched ideas for partnerships, donation programs, and mentorship initiatives. Some said no, some were skeptical, but a few believed in the vision. Together, we created programs to help people find jobs, housing, and guidance. Seeing someone get their first paycheck after months of struggle was as thrilling as making my own first big sale. I realized that true success isn't measured in dollars alone, it's measured by the lives you touch. One evening, after a long day of managing orders and mentoring sessions, I paused and reflected. The journey from my lowest point seemed almost unreal. I thought about the nights in my car, the eviction notices, the hunger and the fear. I remembered the moments of despair when I felt invisible to the world. And now, here I was, owning a growing business, mentoring others, and sharing my story publicly. I allowed myself a rare moment of gratitude. I smiled. I whispered to myself, "You made it." Not because life became easy, but because I never gave up. Every struggle, every tear, every sleepless night had led me here. And in that moment, I understood the true meaning of resilience. By this point, I began receiving invitations to speak at larger events. Local conferences, community gatherings, and even schools wanted me to share my story. Each speech started with my journey from homelessness, the immigrant struggles, and moments of betrayal. I spoke openly about the nights I cried alone and the mornings I forced myself to keep going. The audience listened, some nodding, some with tears in their eyes. It was humbling. It was validating. I realized that my story had power beyond my own life. It could motivate, inspire, and ignite hope in people who were facing their own battles. And every time I spoke, I felt my purpose solidifying. My pain was now a platform for change. Around this time, a surprising opportunity came from the media. A local news outlet wanted to feature my journey. I was hesitant at first, but I agreed, knowing it could reach more people. The interview was emotional. I shared the raw truth, the fear, the hunger, the isolation.
I spoke about the tiny victories, the slow progress, and the lessons that shaped me. The story went viral in our community. Messages poured in from strangers thanking me for being honest and vulnerable. For many, seeing someone overcome such hardships sparked a glimmer of hope. It reminded them that even in their darkest moments, change is possible. And I realized vulnerability could be one of the strongest tools for connection. With increased visibility, my business began attracting more opportunities. Collaborations with other small business owners, media features, and mentorship requests became frequent.
I realized I had built more than a business. I had built a platform to inspire, guide, and support others. I used every interaction to share lessons from my journey: patience, persistence, and perseverance. I reminded people that success rarely comes overnight, that setbacks are part of the process, and that every small step forward counts. I began keeping a journal of these lessons, planning to one day compile them into a guide for anyone trying to climb out of adversity. I felt a sense of fulfillment I had never experienced before. By now, I had a team helping me manage the growing business. I hired people who had faced their own struggles, giving them a chance to rebuild their lives. We shared a common understanding: hardship taught resilience. The energy in our small office was electric. Everyone brought determination, creativity, and empathy. We celebrated even small wins together: first big order, first positive customer review, first expansion into a new product line. I watched my team grow alongside the business. It reminded me that success is amplified when shared, and each day I felt more certain that my journey, from homelessness, betrayal, and struggle, had not only shaped me, but also empowered others around me. At this stage, I also began planning for long-term stability. Investments, savings, and emergency funds became a priority. I wanted to ensure that no future hardship could push me back to the edge. Financial literacy, which I had learned the hard way, became a cornerstone of my life. I created budgets, tracked expenses meticulously, and studied investment strategies. I even began offering workshops to others, teaching them what I had learned the tough way. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now teaching people how to avoid the struggles I had endured. And in doing so, I felt empowered, purposeful, and deeply connected to my mission. As the second year of my business approached, I reflected on the incredible journey. From sleeping in my car to mentoring others, from struggling to eat to managing a growing business, it felt surreal. I remembered the doubts, the betrayals, the moments I wanted to give up, and yet I had persevered. Every sleepless night, every tear, every act of persistence had compounded into something meaningful. I realized that the challenges had taught me more than success ever could. Resilience, patience, empathy, and self-belief, these were the true rewards. And for the first time, I felt completely ready for whatever the next chapter would bring. Around this time, I received an unexpected invitation. A prominent entrepreneurship podcast wanted me as a guest.
They wanted to hear my story, my struggles, and the lessons I had learned. I accepted, nervous but excited. During the recording, I spoke honestly about homelessness, financial struggles, rejection, and my slow climb back. I shared the small victories, the mentors who guided me, and the lessons I had learned about resilience. Listeners responded immediately. Messages poured in thanking me for sharing my raw journey. People said they felt inspired, motivated, and understood. I realized my story had reached far beyond my local community, and the impact was deeply humbling. After the podcast aired, opportunities multiplied. I began receiving requests to speak at workshops, schools, and community events across the state. I even got approached by small business incubators to share my experience with startups. Each invitation was a chance to amplify my message, to show that failure isn't final, that struggle doesn't define you, your response does. Every time I spoke, I emphasized practical lessons: perseverance, strategic thinking, and self-belief. But I also shared the emotional side: the fear, the shame, and the courage it takes to keep going. People resonated with honesty and vulnerability, and I realized that the story I had once feared sharing was now inspiring and empowering countless others. By now, I had fully embraced my role as a mentor and leader. I wasn't just building a business anymore, I was building a community, a network of people who supported each other, shared knowledge, and inspired growth. We celebrated successes, learned from failures, and held each other accountable. I saw firsthand how providing guidance, resources, and encouragement could change lives. It reminded me of the kindness I received during my darkest days, and it reinforced my belief:
No one succeeds entirely alone. Our struggles become meaningful when we use them to uplift others. And with each life I touched, I felt my own story gaining deeper purpose. I understood that true success was measured in impact, not just income. Around this time, I was approached by a local university. They wanted me to give a guest lecture on entrepreneurship and resilience. Standing in front of a room full of students, I shared my journey, from homelessness to business growth. I spoke about the sleepless nights, the fear of failure, and the small victories that kept me moving forward. I also shared actionable advice, how to set goals, manage finances, and develop mental toughness. The students listened intently, some taking notes, some nodding, and a few with tears in their eyes. It was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I realized that my story had transformed into a tool for education, inspiration, and empowerment. As my visibility grew, I started to receive recognition from local media and community organizations. Awards, interviews, and features highlighted my journey and my work helping others. It was humbling to be acknowledged publicly, but more importantly, it validated the idea that one person's perseverance can create ripple effects.
I thought back to the nights I doubted myself, to the fear and isolation of homelessness, and I realized that every hardship had built the foundation for this impact. Recognition wasn't the goal, but it reminded me that my story could serve as a beacon of hope for others navigating their own struggles. By this stage, I had begun expanding my business beyond my local community. I explored e-commerce platforms, social media marketing, and collaborations with other entrepreneurs. The work was challenging, but my past had prepared me for it. Every obstacle felt manageable because I had faced far greater uncertainty before. I applied lessons from my personal struggles, resilience, patience, strategic thinking, to business decisions. Orders increased, and my brand gained a reputation for authenticity and reliability. And through it all, I never forgot my roots. I continued mentoring, volunteering, and giving back to the community that had supported me when I had nothing. Success, I realized, wasn't just about growth. It was about staying grounded. As I looked ahead, I realized the power of storytelling. My personal journey from homelessness, betrayal, and hardship to resilience and growth had become my greatest asset. I began writing a series of articles, recording videos, and sharing insights online. People connected with authenticity and vulnerability. They wanted guidance, motivation, and proof that transformation was possible. I understood that my story could reach far beyond my immediate network. It could inspire, educate, and empower thousands of people. And each time someone reached out to thank me or share their own journey, I felt a profound sense of purpose. I realized my struggles had not been in vain. They were a bridge to help others rise. By now, I had fully embraced my role as a mentor, entrepreneur, and storyteller. I reflected on how far I had come, from sleeping in my car to facing daily uncertainty, to building a thriving business and helping others along the way. The journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about purpose, impact, and leaving a legacy. Every setback had taught me a lesson. Every struggle had strengthened my resolve, and every connection I made had reminded me that we rise higher when we lift others. I understood that my life story wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who needed hope, courage, and proof that change is possible. Now, standing at this moment, I can see the full arc of my journey, from the despair of homelessness, rejection, and uncertainty, to the empowerment of business success, mentorship, and community impact. I've learned that resilience isn't just enduring hardship. It's using it as fuel to grow, to inspire, and to transform. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt was worth it. Because today, I don't just survive, I thrive. And more importantly, I help others thrive alongside me. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. Your past does not define you. Your choices do. Keep going. Keep believing. Keep building.